Right, thanks for joining my session today. I'll be talking to you about Oracle Exadata Cloud Services 101. I have a favor to ask. I like my presentations to be very interactive. I'm quite happy for you to ask questions throughout. So if you've got a question, if you can ask it in the panel, if you can raise your hand and the host can allow you to speak live if you're not shy enough, then I'd appreciate that and I'll answer it there. If it's a complex question, I may defer it to the end. I'd rather have questions throughout if possible. Also, if possible, if you could turn your camera on, if you're not camera shy, so I can see participation, I can see the nodding, I can see that everyone's following or not following, and I may need to go into more detail. But also, if I don't see nods, I may ask, and if you can then just drop a message in the chat, it just gives me that feedback so I know what's happening. It's very different this virtual world compared to when we present in real life. Okay, perfect. Okay, so a little bit about myself. For some reason, the slide has changed, but not on my screen. Are you seeing a bit about myself?
Yeah, that's what we see.
Okay, some slight hiccup on my PowerPoint, but not to worry, I'll look that way. So a little bit about myself. I'm a principal consultant here within advisory services at version 1 in the UK. I'm an Oracle certified master. I'm also an Oracle ACE. I have deep expertise in Oracle, in particular core tech. So that's the database, RAC, data guard, engineer systems, which is Exadata, and all public clouds. If I could ask you to kindly scan this QR code here, that will take you to my blog where you'll have quick links to my social media, which I would kindly ask if you could follow. That'd be much appreciated. Okay, a little bit about my employer. We specialize in Oracle, Microsoft, AWS, Red Hat more recently. We have over 2,000 employees across 12 offices. We've been around now for 25 years. We have 500 plus customers. Okay, so a few of our customers, as you can see here, if you're based in the UK or Ireland, you may recognize some of them. Some of them are global, so you may recognize them, but we do work across all industries and sectors. Okay, so now we've got all the marketing stuff from a corporate side out the way. Talk about the subject. So the subject is obviously Oracle Exadata Cloud Services 101. Okay, so for me to actually explain about Exadata Cloud Services, I need to first explain what an Exadata machine is. Appreciate some of you may know this, but it'll be just a recap. But effectively, as I've depicted here by this picture here, we have a very smart brain, but it's very strong. So the purpose of this is actually in Exadata, all it is very broad Oracle Sun hardware. But what makes it really different is its marriage with very smart Oracle software. So again, the hardware, it's not unique to Exadata. You could actually go and buy the most broad Oracle Sun hardware, which would be the Sun X9 servers, which have just recently come out, get the latest Intel Xeon processors, get PCIe flash cards, get persistent memory, get Rocky, which is remote memory access over converged Ethernet, which is 100 gigabit network. Put it all together and you'd have very broad hardware, but what you won't have is the smart software. And because Oracle engineered this system from the database RDMS code set through to grid infrastructure, through to the operating system, the Linux operating system, which also has Exadata software on there, through to the storage servers, through the networking, etc. It's a full end-to-end system. So what you can't do is put the code in other areas, which Oracle can. So that's what really sets it apart from the rest, is the integration of hardware with smart software. Hopefully that's making sense. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so next thing I'm going to talk about is the smart software. So this picture here is just to depict there actually is no secret source to Exadata. It's actually quite transparent. It's just all smart software. As I said, in a normal conventional non-Exadata system, you only have code at the database server. So you have the RDMS code. If you've got RAC, you've got your grid infrastructure code there. but everything else is just hardware. So your storage subsystem, networking, etc. Within Exadata, they put code all the way throughout the stack. So by doing that, it allows us to get all of these features, which I'll briefly talk about. So Smart Scan, those not aware, on a non-Exadata platform, whenever you query a very large data set, so say for example 1 terabyte database, sorry, 1 terabyte table, you need to scan that whole 1 terabyte data, assuming you're doing a full table scan, and that has to be read off the storage subsystem, go through your network, go to the DB node. The DB node needs to filter that data. And say for argument's sake, you're only getting 10% back, you're filtering out 90%. But the problem is storage subsystems are getting faster and faster, especially with the invent of Flash. But what's the bottleneck is the actual network. So what Oracle do, and knew this as a problem for many years ago, is minimize the movement of data. Let's not try and get the data through the network to the DB server, but let's actually do the predicate filtering at the storage. Let's try and do the joins there and only bring back the resultant to the database server. So that's one very smart feature. The next thing is storage index. So with storage indexes, whenever you query data, Oracle automatically records the min and max values of various columns, and it keeps that in memory in a map. So whenever you come and run a query to say, for example, that 1 terabyte table, and you say my predicate is department ID equals 12, for example, it will go, okay, it does it in 1 megabyte chunk. So this allocation unit has a min value of 3, a max value of 9. My predicate says 12. 12 is not between those values, so I just do not do that IO. So that's called IO avoidance. And you may get rid of half of your data set by that. So 50% of IO which you requested just doesn't happen, but a non-Exadata it has to do that. And then the remainder goes on to the next feature, which is Smart Flash Cache. So Exadata comes with 2 options: Extreme Flash and Extreme Flash and High Capacity. High Capacity is a mixture of platter disks with Flash Cache, but with Flash Cache, which is different to normal cache in a storage system that doesn't know about the data. Whenever you read data frequently, it will just put it into cache, whereas Exadata Smart Flash Cache knows what those IOs are. So it knows what a buffer cache read is, it knows what a log write is, it knows what an RMAN backup is. So there's no point trying to put an RMAN backup into cache, because that would be a waste of resource. So it's very clever and intelligently puts what data is read frequently into Flash Cache, and it gives you the throughput of Flash, but the capacity of disk. So typically you get a hit ratio of like 98, 99, up to 100, which is great. Next feature you get on Exadata, which is unique, is the hybrid columnar compression. So those that know, data in a database is relational and is stored in columnar format, row format. You can pivot it to columnar with lots of different database technologies, but that does have its disadvantages. What a hybrid columnar compression does, as the word said, is it does a hybrid, takes the best of both. So it's still stored in row format, but it pivots it into columnar, but for just a compression unit. So that compression unit is defined based on the compression ratio you go for, sorry, not ratio, but the type. So if you go for the high compression, then it's a larger compression unit. And by doing that, when you pivot just at a compression unit, you get more commonality of values being repeated, and then you can compress that down to get significant compression ratios, typically up to 10, if not more. Next thing is IORM. So again, another unique feature to Exadata. You can prioritize your IO. So it knows what a buffer read is, it knows what a log write is, it knows what a backup IO is, and it prioritizes ones that are more important and then gives the remaining IO to the secondary things. Again, you can tag databases. So you can say, I have a platinum database, a gold database, silver database, a bronze database, and it will prioritize the IO for the gold, which could be a production database, and then your silver and bronze could be your dev and test, and then whatever's left, it gives it to that. Moving on to the next thing, mission critical high availability. That's about instant detection of compute nodes and storage failure. So in a non-Exadata environment where you have rack, if you lose your compute node, it has to wait for a heartbeat to be missed for a certain amount of time. That's usually 30 seconds, and then it reconfigures, and then you get your service back. So you have a brownout period of 30 seconds. Within Exadata, because there is hardware engineered together, it has the ability to use the network layer to then probe both ports of that compute node, and within 2 seconds, if it gets no response back from both of them, it deems it not available and then takes it out of the cluster immediately, reducing that brownout from 30 seconds down to 2 seconds. So another feature. Reliability, we're talking about all Exadatas are coming pre-configured, pre-tuned, and pre-tested, and effectively just delivered to you as a solution. Whereas the opposite is you have to build it yourself. So, you know, it might not be configured correctly, might not be optimally tuned, might not be fully tested, etc., etc. Going back to supportability, all Exadata machines are effectively identical. If there is an issue with an Exadata, Oracle will resolve that. Once they've learned the intel on that, that then is put into the next patch release, and then everyone else who's got Exadata gets the benefit of that. Whereas if you build your own, you don't get that benefit. Okay, hopefully everyone's followed so far. Any questions? Quite happy to answer any. Okay, everyone's good? Perfect. Okay, now we've explained what Exadata is. Now it's to explain the different types. So the first one being the traditional on-prem Exadata, that's in the customer's data center. You purchase it all up front, and it's customer managed. This has been available since back in 2008 when Oracle Exadata first came out. It was HP hardware with smart Oracle software. Later generations, Oracle decided to purchase Sun Microsystems, so then it became Sun Microsystem hardware, which is obviously Oracle with Oracle software. So it became red on red, basically. Between 2008 to 2016, it was only on-prem that was available. But then in 2016, Exadata Cloud Services became available. Biggest difference is those Exadatas were now no longer in your data center, but in Oracle's data center. The model of how you pay for it changed from being a CapEx to an OpEx, minimum term being 48 hours. So you could spin up an Exadata in OCI for 48 hours. After that, you're free to terminate it. It's managed by Oracle rather than yourself, which is great. So you're going up the cloud stack from being a PaaS service. And then a year later in 2017, Oracle Exadata Cloud at Customer came out, which is kind of in between. So still managed by Oracle, still a subscription model. Only difference is in the data's it was in the customer's data center rather than Oracle's data center. And because Oracle put hardware in your data center, the minimum subscription term went to 4 years. So it's more like a lease. Okay, so moving on to the advantages and disadvantages of on-premise first. So on-premise, you purchase the hardware, it's yours. You're free to use all the CPUs up to your license entitlement. So on Exadata, they have a concept of capacity on demand. So you can use it all the way up to that maximum. In some regards, you want to use it to maximum to sweat your asset. Another feature is you can use normal redundancy. So those that are familiar with ASM, you have external redundancy, one-way mirror, not available on Exadata. You have two-way mirror, which is normal, available on Exadata, but only on-prem. And then you have high three-way mirror, which is available, the only available option in cloud. So hence, on-prem had the advantage of using normal redundancy and getting more usable space, especially when you have a data guard. So then you have two-way mirror on primary, another two-way mirror on DL. You effectively have 4 copies of the same ASM allocation unit. Because you purchased it up front, similar to when you buy a car, it's up to you how long you want to sweat that asset. You might want to change it after a year, 2 years, 3 years. You can go even longer. The longer you have it, the more return on investment you get. So you can have it quite comfortably up to 7 years. After 7 years, it starts to become pretty much near end of life, and then you need to ensure you re-platform before Oracle end of life that Exadata, and then you don't get any supportability. For example, if a hard drive fails, you're not going to get a replacement. Okay, so disadvantages of on-prem, it's a fixed cost. So you pay for it all up front, just like you pay for a car up front. If you use it once a week or once a month, then you're not really getting much return on investment. Use it every day, then you're going to get a lot of return on investment. So it's a fixed cost regardless of use. There's no cloud benefit, so there's no elasticity, there's no automation in terms of provisioning, etc., and it does force your rest estate to be on-prem. So typically, Exadata is the the elephant in the room, and if you don't address it, then it kind of fundamentally locks everything else to be on-prem. Okay, so now moving on to Exadata Cloud Services. So the advantages of Exadata Cloud Services over on-prem is now you get scalable CPU charging, whereas before you're paying for your maximum all the time. In Oracle Cloud Services, you set a minimum and you set a maximum, and then you can scale between your min and maximum. It's not done quite automatically. There are scripts that Oracle give you. There's a MOS node. You put those scripts onto your Exadata Cloud Services, and effectively it monitors the load on your servers. And if the load goes above your minimum, then it uses the CLI to then go to OCI to say increase the infrastructure OCPU to match the workload, and it'll keep increasing up to your maximum. And they're quite the opposite. When your workload goes down, it automatically goes down. So it gives you that flexible cost model and allows you to right size quite granularly. So you're just paying for your peaks, and when you're at your troughs, you pay the minimal from an OCPU point of view. You get all the cloud benefits, so you can provision, elasticate, etc., all that good stuff. It now tackles the elephant in the room, so it enables you to move all your workload to the cloud, including application and other integrations and peripheral services. There is a concept of annual flex, which is where you buy annual credits and then you use those annual credits to purchase your Exadata Cloud Services. With that, when your Exadata Cloud Services becomes a little bit aged and you think, okay, there's a new generation out and I want to move to that, use your cloud credits to spin up a new one, do a migration from old to new, and terminate the old. So you have that flexibility. Disadvantage, as mentioned earlier, you're only allowed to use high redundancy within cloud services where you can't use normal. So you end up, if you're used to normal from on-prem, you do get less capacity in that sense. But newer generations, you always get more and more usable capacity because the disks get bigger and bigger. You could see it as a disadvantage, but if your applications are latency sensitive, then you need to tackle everything as a big bang approach. So you need to move your database into Exadata Cloud Services, but you also need to move all the application servers at the exact same time. Okay, so moving on to Exadata Cloud at Customer. Very similar to Exadata Cloud Services. Biggest difference is that the machine is not in Oracle's cloud, it's in your data center. Main reason for this could be sovereignty laws that require the data to stay in the country of its origin, and there is no region within your country, and therefore use Exadata Cloud at Customer. You still get all the benefits that you get with Exadata Cloud Services, still managed via the Oracle Cloud Plane as it is in Exadata Cloud Services. As mentioned, satisfy regulations such as GDPR, and also those customers that are comfortable to go to the cloud. As stupid it may sound, it gives reassurance to them because they can physically see the Exadata in their data center, but it is actually part of the Oracle Cloud. But you need to ensure that you have required bandwidth, latency to the Oracle Cloud, especially if you're going to try and use Oracle backup services, so you will need to provision a Oracle Fast Connect. Okay, so advantages of Oracle Exadata Cloud at Customer. Again, you still get the scalable CPU, which is great. You get all the cloud benefits. It does enable you to move to the cloud, but the biggest benefit of all is that it's physically located in your data center. Again, coming back to those sovereignty regulations, GDPR, etc. Also, you might have applications for whatever reason can't go to the cloud. For example, you might have very huge application servers that have very big, large CPU requirements or memory requirements, and a cloud provider can't give you that. So that needs to stay on-prem. Then the database that needs to be co-located, then you can use Exadata Cloud at Customer. And disadvantage is very similar to previous. Only can use high redundancy. Need to make sure you got sufficient bandwidth. And again, going back to the lease term, you have to have it for a minimum of 4 years. After 4 years, you can extend it to 5 and 6. But after 6, you then have to forfeit that and then go on to the latest and greatest. So before I move on, just to get some feedback. Oh, I think I've got a question. Can we have mixed redundancy, i.e. different redundancies for different disk groups? Right, very good question. So let me click answer live. Yes, so on premise, yes, you are able to have normal and high. So if you choose to, you could have whatever disk group on high, another one on normal. For example, you might, if you choose to have data on high redundancy and Rico on normal redundancy, but in Exadata Cloud Services and Exadata Cloud at Customer, you only have the option of high, so every disk group would be high. So hopefully that's answered that question. I'm quite happy to answer any other questions if you want to ask verbally or through the panel or through chat. I'll give a moment. And if the person who asked that question could just put back in the chat rather than the Q&A panel that they're quite happy with that answer. I don't see confirmation, but I will carry on and I'll come back to that. Okay, so now moving on to, thanks. Is it on premise? I will follow up later with you. Okay, yeah. Again, yeah, just to reiterate, on premise, you have that flexibility, but not in cloud services and cloud or customer. Basically, Oracle are adopting a platinum kind of approach to your data. So they want to ensure that you've got three-way mirroring. So if you lose one copy, you still got another 2 copies. And also don't forget when you're patching Exadata, you've got 1 out for patching and then you've got 2 remaining. So you might have another failure. So double failure, they still want you to have uptime. So hence why they always say triple mirror. Okay, so now moving on to Auraflexa in a hybrid environment. So if anyone was wishing to go hybrid, one of our customers have done this recently. We highly recommend you only mix Exadata Cloud at Customer with Exadata Cloud Services and not on-prem with either of those options. The main reason is you want to have that commonality of the Oracle Cloud Plane to manage your infrastructure, manage your Exadata machines and not have one manual and have one automated. Another big reason is TDE, transparent data encryption, is part of Exadata Cloud Services as well as Exadata Cloud at Customer, but isn't part of on-prem. You have to purchase that, and if you don't have the entitlement to that, then you're going to need to purchase that. Otherwise, you're going to be in a very tricky situation where the database in the cloud is encrypted and it's not encrypted on-prem. So how do you manage that? Or you do have it encrypted on-prem as well, but then you have a license compliance issue. So another reason just to only mix cloud at Customer with cloud services. Okay, so now moving on to the Oracle Cloud Plane, just mentioned earlier. So this is used to manage your Exadata machines. It performs all the lifecycle management operations. So that's creating, modifying, and deleting databases, taking your backups, doing restores, doing your patching for Exadata. So that's the infrastructure, doing the patching for the operating system, do the patching for GI, doing the patching for database. Also, it's where you define your OCPU scaling, so where you set the minimum value, set the maximum value, etc. It's also where all the tracking is done for your usage, and therefore the back of it generates your bill. You can connect to Oracle Cloud Plane through a secure browser, through SLIs, REST APIs, etc. As I mentioned earlier, you can use those scripts that you run, which then obviously does the auto scaling interfaces through them. For those customers that will go for Exadata Cloud at Customer, the actual Oracle Cloud Plane since Gen 2 is actually in the Oracle Cloud, not co-located on-prem. Therefore, some worry is actually what happens when your Exadata disconnects with the Oracle Cloud. Actually, nothing major happens. Your Exadata still runs as normal. It will still track your usage. When it reconnects, it'll just upload that usage, and then you'll be that will just go into your billing, so nothing's lost there. And OCPU scaling still works. The only thing is, whatever min max you set is what it will scale between. You can't increase it. You need to be back online to then change the min max values. Okay, so 25 past. Okay, so now talking about the different database versions available on Exadata Cloud Services. So they support the latest and greatest 19C. 21 hasn't yet got onto there, but I expect will do shortly. It does go back through to 18C, through both cuts of 12C and even older 11G release 2. I think that's more for older legacy systems that still need that version and not supported on older versions. But I do suspect at some point they're going to drop supportability of 11G release 2. So you just need to be mindful of that. Okay, so just mark that as done. So both questions answered. Okay, so now we're on to Exadata Cloud Servicing and licensing. So there's two models. There's license included as well as bring your own license. License included, as the word says, includes all your licenses into the OCPU cost. So that's one for running the OCPU as well as all the licenses in there. So if you have any perpetual licenses, you forfeit them. You don't pay for the support of them. Everything is all done on an OpEx model. With license included, you will get Enterprise Edition, and then all of these mentioned here. So you get multi-tenant, database and memory, rack, active data guard, partitioning with advanced compression. So HCC, it allows you to do, you can do HCC for free, but if you want to do row locking, then you need advanced compression. So you get that included, as well as the others mentioned there. If you go for the opposite, which is bring your own license, then you're only paying a much reduced rate for the OCPU usage, but you're not paying for the license in time when you then have to ensure you have the perpetual licenses to cover your usage. You still need to pay the support cost for it, but then you can use it on your Exadata Cloud Services or Exadata Cloud Customer or even on-prem. But with the cloud services and cloud customer, when you bring Enterprise Edition, you do get the rights to additional options, which are TDE, the Diagnostics Tuning Pack, data masking, subset pack, and real application testing, which you don't normally get. One other thing, which obviously is just for on-prem only, is you need to buy extra storage licenses. So you pay for disk licenses if you're on the high capacity. If you're on the Extreme Flash, you pay for each Extreme Flash card. When you talk about cloud services and cloud customer, all of them are defunct. There is no storage license. It's all included, part of the bring your own license subscription as well as license included. Standard edition is explicitly not supported on Exadata, so you can't port those licenses over. Okay. Okay, so next I'm just going to go into costing, but again, I'll give opportunity if anyone to ask questions. If no questions, if I can get a nod that everyone's still following. Yeah, cool. Okay, so now talking about costing. So on the X8, there is 4 permutations available. The lowest entry point is a new base system, which only gives you 74 terabytes of usable storage. With the base unit, you don't get persistent memory. That's the only difference. It's very similar to the 8th rack in size and comes in at £7.67 UK pounds, and it's costed per hour. Moving on then onto the quarter rack, that's double the size. You get 149 terabytes of storage. With this, you do get persistent memory. That's if you're on the M version, and that's at £10.35. And then it linearly goes up. So you double it, you get double the storage, double the cost to half rack, and then double it again to get just under 600 terabytes at £41.40 per hour, and that's a full rack cost. And then more recently, Oracle have come out with the X8M, which is the persistent memory version. Again, you do get that quarter rack option, exactly the same price as the X8. Get 149 terabytes of usable storage, and you get a certain amount of persistent memory. However, you're not fixed now or bound by the quarter rack. Quarter rack is the base version, but you don't bound by the half rack and the full rack. You can still get half rack and full rack, but you just add the X number of database servers to make it a half rack or a full rack, and the same X number of storage servers. But with this now, they're giving you the flexibility, so you can add X number of database servers if you want more compute or memory for database and memory, or the opposite, if you don't want so much compute, then you can add more storage servers to get more usable storage. It gives you that flexibility, similar to Exadata on-prem. From X5 onwards, you had the elastic configuration. It's the very same concept. The only thing is you can only go up to a maximum of 32 database servers or a maximum of 64 storage servers. Okay, so now moving on to the OCPU. So as mentioned, there's 2 license models, license included and bring your own license. So bring your own license is only 23 pence, and you're just paying for the compute of running the CPU. Whereas if you go license included, you're paying for the compute, but on top of that, the entitlement to use all your licenses. This is all costed per hour, same price for X7 older generation, X8 and X8M, the newer generation, and then the base system. X9M has only just come out, and I'd say within the next few months, the pricing will come out for that, as well as the availability of that in the Oracle Cloud. So at the moment, it's all based on X8M. Okay, so now talking about disaster recovery. So you can use disaster recovery for Exadata Cloud Services and Cloud Customer. Use DataGuard to mitigate failure, and you can mitigate failure of a region. So you do it across region, or you can have it between availability domains similar to AZs. So if you lose a AD, you've still got a disaster recovery copy of it on another AD, and you can use it within the same region. The infrastructure cost is still a one-to-one cost. So if you've got a quad-rack primary, you still have a quad-rack DR. The only difference is the OCPU. So the OCPU to run your primary will be higher because you've got your redo workload as well as your read activity, write activity, all of that, which will obviously increase CPU. Whereas on your DR, you're only running the redo. So you can set your min and max, but actually in reality, your average on your primary is going to be significantly higher than your DR, which is only running enough compute to do the redo log. So it can typically be a lot less, so 2 to 4, depending on your workload. But that will auto scale as your redo stream goes up and down. So is that all making sense so far? Perfect. Okay, so now to illustrate a pricing example. So Exadata Cloud Services and Cloud Customer, it's dedicated infrastructure, it's not shared, it's all for you. So there is no noisy neighbor syndrome, it's tenanted for you. Just to give you an example of costing. So if you went with a quarter rack, 149 terabytes, just for illustration purposes, I've kept it 20 old CPUs throughout each example. The infra cost, which I showed you previously, times by a month's worth would be just under 8,000. And the old CPU, bear in mind, this is license included, so you're not going to have your perpetual licenses, and will come out just over 14,000. DR is actually 7,000 cost there, or 7,700, plus just 2 old CPUs instead of 20. That comes at 9,000. Add that all up together, it's 31,000 per month. And then annually, that would be 373,000. If you compare that with bring your own license, significantly less. The infra cost is exactly the same going across. It's just the OCPU cost goes down considerably for your primary and DR. So the main thing really to work out there is this cost plus your support cost for your perpetual licenses. If it's less than this cost, stick to bring your own license model. If, however, your support costs for your perpetual licenses plus this is higher than this cost, you might as well forfeit your licenses and then just go license included, and then you indirectly get more license entitlement because license included includes all options which you may not necessarily have if you've got certain perpetual licenses. If you then increase that to half rack, you get double the storage. The infra cost is directly proportional double, but the OCPU, because I've kept it 20 throughout, is exactly the same. So this overall cost is just doubled only on the infra cost, but OCPU is staying the same. And then that kind of goes through to full rack. It's just the infra cost that increases, OCPU cost is the same. Obviously, if you've got full rack, you might want to have more OCPU. So obviously that cost would go up. So to have a full rack with just under 600 terabytes, which is quite a lot, it'll be just under $1 million just under 800,000 per annum. This is all list price. So this is what you pay. For example, if you was doing pay as you go, if you purchase annual flex, where you're committing to have annual spend, then you purchase universal credits for a year, and you purchase that at a reduced rate. So you might purchase £1 million worth of credits for 900,000, for example, but you still be worth $1 million, and then you'll spend that on here. So you might spend 700 a year in here, and then the remainder on cloud backup services or whatever else. But for bring your own license, you just got to make sure it's imperative you have the appropriate licensing. I know this is quite complex, so is there any questions there? No. Okay. Okay, so in summary, nearly towards the end of the presentation is to explain Exadata Cloud Services. So it's very elastic in the sense that you've got elastic compute. They always go with the latest generation of Intel Xeon processor for every generation that comes out. As mentioned earlier, you've got the elastic configuration, so you can have up to 32 database servers, which gives a phenomenal 1,600 database server cores, which mind-blowing to be honest. But if you double that, you get that many threads, and that's if you've got very big CPU workloads. You also get, if you use 32 database servers, 44 terabytes of DDR4 RAM, so very fast RAM. If you were to have a very large database in memory, you could have 44 terabytes of that. On the opposite scale, if you're looking more scalable storage, again, always has the latest generation of Intel Xeon processors. However, if you look at a storage server compared to a compute server, they only have 48 cores on storage server and 64 cores on a compute server. So even though you have double 64 storage servers versus the 32, it's not exactly double 1600, it's just 3072 storage cores. But again, that's just for doing like your smart scans, storage index, all that sort of stuff. So it's not the CPU demands on there is not as much as what you would be at the compute layer. So yeah, anyway, so you can have up to 3,000 storage server cores, but more phenomenally, you can have 2.5 petabyte database size. You know, that's kind of mind-blowing, the size there, and that's all triple mirrored as well. You'll have 1.6 petabytes of flash, 96 terabytes of persistent memory, and then more even impressive is you'll get 1,600 gigabytes per second, so gigabytes per second SQL flash bandwidth. So if you had, you know, a 2 terabyte database or table, it would read it in, you know, just over 1 second. If you look at IOPS, if you went with the maximum 64 storage servers, you're going to get 48 million persistent memory flash reads per second, and then writes it's 32 million, which again, they're all very mind-blowing figures. But typically most will go with the quarter rack up to about full rack size, but Oracle have made it that you can really scale this out to very vast database sizes. Final thing to mention then is just the faster networking. So previously Oracle used to be on InfiniBand, which used to be 40 gigabits bidirectional, but as of the X8, X8M, they brought out the 100 gigabits Rocky internal fabric, which is for the interconnect, the storage, and Rocky, as mentioned earlier, is remote memory access over converged Ethernet. And also they've increased the connectivity out of the X8 machine. So for your client connectivity, for your TNS layer, for application to database, up to 25 gigabits. And also you can have 25 gigabits for your backups as well. And there's multiple ports, so you can aggregate them in to get increased. But so yeah, you could get up to 50 if you used it for client and backup was done internally, for example. Okay, any questions? Everyone's silent. Hopefully I'm explaining it great. We're 5 minutes ahead of schedule, so we've got 5 minutes for questions. But just before I finish, I just wanted to say everything's correct as of October 2021, so as of now. But as I've noticed over time, things do constantly evolve, especially around the service offerings, licensing, costing. Costing is actually an interesting one. So for example, if you compare the X7 to the X8 to the X8M, so X8M is the same price, but X7 is actually significantly more than the X8. And I'm suspecting the X9 is going to be cheaper than the X8. So really Oracle encouraging to go with the latest generation rather than the older generations. And they're trying to bring the cost point down competitively to make it more attractive for people to take up. Always advise you to carry out your own due diligence before you take Exadata Cloud Services or Exadata Cloud Customer, or consult with the Oracle Cloud partners such as Version 1. And finally say thank you very much for attending my presentation. Really much appreciate. Ask you if you could scan that QR code again just to follow me on social media, that much appreciated. And I'll open up the floor for questions. And we just have 4 minutes. Sure, we possibly could go over if needed, but if there are any questions, please do ask. And if no questions, quite happy to take feedback. Was that what you was expecting? Did you learn something new, etc., etc.? Oh, I think there is a question. Let me have a look. Can you share some light on persistent memory usage, please? Yes. Okay, so persistent memory is a new thing that came out since X8M, obviously continues into the X9M. And the main thing for it is, if you think about tiered storage, you've got the very slowest being your platter disks, then you've got flash cache, or you say, let's say your flash cards, which then converts into flash cache, which then is caching between the disks. And then above that, you've got your DDR RAM, which obviously is your database buffer cache. And between that and your CPU cache, which you have level 1 and 2, etc., now comes a new entry point, which is persistent memory. And the higher you go up, the more cost it is. The lower you go down, the cheaper it is, and you get more capacity. So what they've done is put persistent memory in there to kind of bridge where you have not enough in your database buffer cache, but you don't really want to get the performance of flash. So it's kind of in between. So it's order of magnitude faster than flash cache, but not as fast as DDR. So it really extends your database buffer cache. So we've seen customers out there that, many transactions per second, not quite fitting into buffer cache, getting the performance of buffer cache at large, but then everything that overspills goes to flash cache. Flash cache is great, it's still fast, but there was that little gap in between. That persistent memory really has filled that gap, and it's allowed what buffer cache blocks are being evicted, rather going to flash cache, it's now going to persistent memory. And then when that needs to be read back in, it's read really fast from persistent memory, put back into buffer cache. It's kind of almost like an extension of your buffer cache. So hopefully that answers your question. Okay, oh, we got no question. If we've got into X8, what would be the ideal way to get to X9? Does Oracle support the migration free of cost? Okay, so I'm assuming you're talking about Exadata Cloud Services here. If you talk about Exadata Cloud Services, that's probably the most flexible. At the end of the day, you've got only that 48 hours minimal commit. So if you're on X8 and X8M, let's say, and very shortly X9M is coming out and you want to migrate, by all means, you can migrate. You just need to spin up the new one, do the migration. Oracle don't explicitly do the migration. There are toolings for you to do it, which you can use, or you can do the migration yourself, like through DataGuard, or you can do through a managed service provider, or any consultancy company can do it. But the effort to migrate as such won't be too much. Once you migrate across, you just terminate your old one. So actually, if you're really bleeding edge, you can effectively, every time a new Exadata comes out, you can keep swapping and swapping and swapping. You just got to manage your migration costs. If you're on-prem, technically you could get the new one every time it comes out, but you've committed to buying that first Exadata with a capex, so you really want to get the most return on investment on that. So it's not really that prudent to move on. It's like, would you buy a brand new car and then a year after, when the new model comes out, keep switching? Yes, you could if you've got the money, but ordinarily you want to kind of maximize your money. With the Exadata Cloud Customer, you actually unfortunately fixed the 4-year lease. So the earliest you could switch would be after another 4 years. Okay, so hopefully answered that, and thanks for your thank you. So any other questions? So we're out of time, but I'm sure we can go over a little bit if possible. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, any other questions? Quite happy to answer. If you can give some feedback, was that great, etc. Let me ask a different question. Of the attendees here, does anybody have Exadata? Are people looking to go Exadata? What are they looking to go for? On-prem, cloud services? Has this presentation give you an idea what cloud services is? Will that kind of sway your mind to go cloud services or cloud.customer? Or does nobody have Exadata?
I don't know if I count as a attendee.
I'll take you as attendee.
But my customer is currently considering Oracle as one of the options. I work for the Norwegian tax services.
Okay.
And they're trying to figure out what they want to do with the whole data warehouse. It's kind of an old system, and
Right.
they've sort of decided that they want to go cloud, and well, Oracle is one of the contenders.
Yes. Yeah, so if you want to go cloud and you want to go Exadata, only Oracle is the only cloud to offer Exadata cloud services. Obviously, none of the cloud providers can provide that. If you're on-prem with Exadata and you want to go to cloud, then again, it kind of only Oracle Cloud can do that. If you try and move away from Oracle, some of our customers do ask us that. It's possible, but you have to understand what you bought into. When I went over the whole raw and hardware, smart software, you can quite easily forget how adopted you are into the platform. You start getting all the smart scans, all the storage index benefits, X, Y, and Z, and it's just kind of transparent, and you're getting all this amazing throughput. You try and then mimic that somewhere else. It's either going to take you X fold longer because SLA is going to go really slow because you're not getting the throughput, or you have to do some refactoring. So you have to take that into consideration. Okay, so I don't think there's any other questions. I have a couple of comments. Yes, have Exadata is also for machine learning. Yes, it is actually. I don't directly have any experience of that, but I'm sure Rick can tell you about that. Autonomous DB is on Exadata. Yes, I did a presentation 2 days ago, Monday, about autonomous database. Explained that it runs on the best database platform, being Exadata, obviously. So yeah, so actually one thing to point out, autonomous runs on Exadata. All of Oracle development runs on Exadata. So whenever they develop the RDMS code, it's done Exadata. A lot of Oracle Cloud is on Exadata. So Oracle pretty much use their own technology, obviously. Next thing, Exadata at on-prem, planning to move to Exadata Cloud. Okay, perfect. So we've got a attendee here who's got on-prem Exadata, and they're now considering going to Exadata Cloud. So I guess fundamentally it's exactly the same. So same skill set, same understanding, same architecture that you've on-prem, be very familiar in cloud. The only thing is the manageability then goes more from yourself as a customer to Oracle. So for example, the patching, whereas you might be doing Oracle Platinum Services to do the patching currently on your on-prem, or you might be doing it yourself, or you might have a managed service provider doing it. When you go to cloud, it's all automated and you kind of just schedule it and then get that patch, etc. So you're kind of adopting more the cloud kind of benefits, which is great. The only disadvantage, depending on what generation you are in, is you have to have the high redundancy. So if you're on, for example, someone said X9 going to X8 to X9, you probably won't notice the normal to high because you're getting more disk space on X9. So you just have to weigh those differences. But yeah, I'm glad you've attended this, so you would have learned a lot about cloud services. Any other questions before we wrap up? No, it sounds like we're good. So again, thank you very much for attending, and thank you very much for hosting us, and that was great.